Hello, welcome to Just the Dis. We talk about Blu-rays here, and today I'm going to talk about some Warner Archive titles for the month of May, and a lot of older stuff and one more recent film. So this is going to be geared a little bit more towards the classic film fan, but if you are so inclined, then stick around. Let's start with They Won't Believe Me. This film from 1947, sort of the classic fatalistic noir where you have a courtroom set up. You have a man accused of murder. That man is Robert Young. And so we hear sort of the courtroom opening. We hear his lawyer sort of present the case as we've heard it and talk about the witnesses. But then we get to hear what actually happened, at least from Robert Young's point of view. And he tells a very interesting tale of a quote-unquote kept man, a man who's married to a very wealthy woman and who has gotten him like a nice job at I believe a brokerage firm. And, he starts to entertain the idea of fooling around on her. And I mean, apparently the marriage isn't that great for him and her. So he finds a girl played by Jane Greer, and that becomes like a fling for him. And basically that's the beginning of the movie. We're seeing the middle section of that affair where he's telling his wife he has to work on Saturdays and meeting Jane Greer in a bar to hang out. Now, how much further it goes from there is unclear, but they are clearly involved. And his wife finds out about it and basically shuts it down. And so then he starts to take a fancy to a girl played by Susan Hayward that works at his brokerage firm. Actually, step back. First, they're in New York. That's where this stuff is happening with Jane Greer. And then she moves them to California and gets him the job at the brokerage firm. And that's where he meets Susan Hayward, playing a character named Verna. She's like a secretary sort of at this firm. And they start to become interested in one another. And I don't want to take it too far. I don't want to go too much further in terms of the plot explanation, but there is a bit more to the relationship with his wife and the efforts that she goes through to try and move him away from potential other women. Like, obviously, there's a problem there, and she really wants to keep him around, and to be honest, I have no idea why. He's not particularly likable. So it's a real tough movie in that sense, because at the end of the day, there is a murder that he is being blamed for that he may or may not be responsible for, but it's difficult to fully have sympathy for this guy as he keeps running around on his wife. So it's a tough one, but it is intriguing, and I am always fascinated by the movies where in that noir sort of, not cliche necessarily, but he tells the story. He's on the stand in the courtroom telling the entire story, and the movie closes with the verdict. Is he guilty or is he not guilty? So it's an interesting one for sure. But I like Susan Hayward. She plays a great sort of femme fatale-ish character. Jane Greer is good, and I forget who plays the wife, but Rita Johnson plays his wife. And it's a decent noir. Like, I enjoyed it. So, and it looks great. That almost goes without saying. It says newly restored and uncut original release version. So that is They Won't Believe Me. Then we have Each Dawn I Die, another sort of, in this case, a prison noir, which starts what looks like to be a newspaper film, where we have James Cagney as the star reporter at this paper, and he's sort of tackling corruption, but in doing so, he upsets some people and ends up getting framed within the first 10 minutes for a crime and is sent to prison. and he meets George Raft on the train, and they will become sort of a duo in a way. I've always liked George Raft, and there's a bit on this. Actually has a commentary track. The other disc doesn't have much in the way of features. This has a few things, but the one that's really interesting is a commentary by film historian Hayden Guest, who apparently is in charge of the Warner Archive at USC, I think. I don't think he said UCLA. But he gives a great track. It's a really informative track where he talks about, Warner Brothers at the time and trends and casting and prison movies. And one thing he says is, of course, that George Raft was famously known for having turned down the role of Rick in Casablanca, and Bogart got it. And obviously that made a huge impact on Bogart's career. And in this case, I believe Bogart was cast. This is from 1939. So before Bogart had really exploded. And I think Bogart was initially cast in the Raft role, and then they finally decided to go with Raft instead. So that's an interesting little switcheroo. But I do like the prison movies of the late 30s and 40s. This would be an interesting pairing with something like Brute Force, which is probably my favorite of those brutal noir prison movies. That one, of course, starring Hume Cronin and Burt Lancaster. This is a sort of similarly rough prison movie. These prison movies of this time, another one that I love is the women's prison movie Caged, which is just super dark, just as dark can be, especially for a period film. So I think this is, if you're into that kind of thing, definitely your bag. It says, framed for manslaughter after he breaks a story about city corruption, reporter Frank Ross is sure he'll prove his innocence and walk out of the prison a free man. But that's not how the system works at Rocky Point Penitentiary. Their cell block guards are vicious, the jute mill labor is endless, and the powers Ross fought on the outside conspire to keep him in. Frank's hope is turned to hopelessness, and he's starting to crack. Two of the screen's most famous tough guys star in this prison movie that cast a reform-minded eye on the brutalizing effects of life in the slammer. That was definitely something that was going on with a lot of these movies, is showing the horrible, horrible conditions of the prisons at this time. And I don't know how much they've improved since then necessarily, but they were clearly quite terrible back then, and these films were both showing the horrible darkness of these places, as well as sort of being a whistleblowing type thing. So I do like that about it, It also has Warner Night at the Movies 1939 short subject gallery, a vintage newsreel, documentary short, A Day in Santa Anita, Oscar-nominated classic cartoon, Detouring America, and trailers for Each Dawn I Die, Wings of the Navy, and then a featurette called Stool Pigeons and Pine Overcoats, The Language of Gangster Films, which is also another cool little extra feature that you don't usually get on these Warner Archive discs. So this one is extra special. Also has something called Breakdowns of 1939, a studio blooper reel, and a bonus cartoon, Each Dawn I Crow, as well as a bonus radio show with George Raft and Francho Tone. So actually a pretty stacked Warner Archive release, but I do recommend it, definitely, if you're into the dark prison noir type stuff. Let's do some comedies. Let's lighten things up a bit here. Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House from 1948 from RKO. This stars, of course, as you can see, Cary Grant, Myrna Loy, and Melvin Douglas. It almost starts like a Frank Tashlin movie. It's directed by H.C. Potter, but it, has that like great sort of New York City, voiceover narration, and they show just the craziness of living in New York, but it's done very tongue-in-cheek and very silly, and that's where I kind of tie it to Tashlin. And then the opening scene is just Mr. Cary Grant fumbling around his very small New York apartment where he has his family and his children. I think they have 2 or 3 kids, and he's like just literally trying to get dressed for work, and he goes in the closet and boxes fall on his head, and he can't barely move around. He's stepping over things. It's obviously supposed to show just how compact and tight the living spaces are in New York. The idea being that he wants to move to the country and that's what this family does. By the way, this is shot by James Wong Howe, one of the great cinematographers of the period, and I love the idea that he's shooting comedies because everything he shoots is quite lovely. But of course, Mrs. Blandings is played by Myrna Loy, famously from the Thin Man movies and others, and I adore her, and she's great in this. And their friend, I think he's a lawyer actually, played by Melvin Douglas, sort of helps with them finding this country estate, which, I mean, this movie is basically the original Money Pit. If you've seen the Money Pit with Tom Hanks, this is kind of the original version. They get this fixer-upper house, and it ends up being too much of a fixer-upper. It's immediately condemned, and then they have to build over it, and getting themselves in trouble and more in debt with each step of the way, and everything that can go wrong does go wrong. So it's one of those kind of movies, but very entertaining and funny. It is, let's see here. There are 2 radio productions, the Lux Radio Theater broadcast starring Cary Grant and Irene Dunn of this, and Screen Directors Playhouse broadcast starring Cary Grant and Betsy Drake. Those are from 1949, 1950. And then there's the cartoon House of Tomorrow, which I believe is is part of the Tex Avery Volume 2 set, but a very great cartoon that sort of lines up with that Frank Tashlin-esque tone, which is also very much in line with Tex Avery's tone in general. But yeah, very fun, house building comedy kind of thing. So Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House is the next one. Then we have Bachelor in Paradise. This from 1961, a late career effort for Bob Hope, who was obviously well past his time with Bing Crosby and doing solo films. This one features Lana Turner, among others. Hope is comically set up as this sort of suave Don Juan type who is writing books about living in other countries when he gets a call from his publisher, I think, or his business manager, I can't remember which, saying like, hey, there's a problem, you have to come back to the United States right now. And he's sort of hanging out with this French girl and kissing her and writing about hanging out with French girls. And what ends up happening is that he comes back to the States and he finds out that, it wasn't his business manager. In fact, his business manager is a crook who has not been filing his tax returns for the past 7-8 years. So he owes a ton of money to the federal government, and he has to find a way to pay it back. And so his publisher's like, well, why don't I set you up here in the States? There are these suburban communities. We'll have you go live in one of those, and you can write a new book called Living in America. And so he goes to live there, and it says America was sprawling away from Main Street, transforming into a nation of bedroom communities within easy commute to the office. But what's going on in those bedrooms? Bob Hope intends to find out when he plays a Bachelor in Paradise. Always quick with a quip, Hope portrays Arthur J. Niles, noted author of books that offer worldly advice while documenting the lifestyles and loves of various cultures. His newest study, Paradise Village, a rambling new suburb in Southern California's San Fernando Valley. Lana Turner, in her only screen teaming with the comedy legend, portrays the stylish unmarried femme who works in the track's sales office. Looks like Paradise may lose a bachelor but gain a comedy. So yeah, it's mostly him sort of trying to romance Lana Turner. And it has a really nice score by Henry Mancini. Very catchy, very groovy, perfect for 1961 in this film. And it's a very colorful film. It looks great on Blu-ray. It's directed by Jack Arnold, of all people, who did, of course, The Creature from the Black Lagoon and others. But I just find that fascinating, the latter career of Jack Arnold, where he was touching on this kind of stuff, So very, very interesting comedy from Jack Arnold for that. Just a couple more here. One more noir. This is called Crossfire. I believe this is from 1947 as well. This has Robert Young again, Robert Mitchum and Robert Ryan, and Gloria Graham. It says years of police work have taught Detective Finlay that where there's crime, there's motive, but he finds no usual motive when investigating a man's death by beating. The man was killed because he was a Jew. Hate, Finlay says, is like a gun. Robert Young portrays Finley. Robert Mitchum is a laconic army sergeant assisting in the investigation of GI suspects, and Robert Ryan plays a vicious bigot in a landmark film noir nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Edward Dmytryk, Murder My Sweet, directs, draping the genre's stylistic backdrops and flourishes around a topic rarely before explored in films, anti-Semitism in the U.S. Here, Hollywood takes aim at injustice and catches bigotry in a crossfire. Yeah, I remember this being a pretty intense movie, pretty powerful stuff, and seeing Robert Ryan being this character. I mean, he played some villains, definitely, but this is one of the tougher ones in my mind to watch. But I remember this being a very solid noir for what it was. Also features a commentary, which is great when they do. Commentary by his film historians Alan Silver and James Orsini. They're a great duo, with audio excerpts of director Edward Dmytryk. So it's always great when you can get commentary bits from the director, who's obviously no longer with us. And then a featurette, Crossfire, Hate is Like a Gun. So a very nice addition to your film noir collection if you're into that. And 85 minutes, so trucks right along. And then we've got our modern film here, Drunken Master 2. I want to say it's also called Legend of Drunken Master. This from 1994, of course, with the great Jackie Chan, a Golden Harvest production. It says, Wong Fei knows the rule, no drunken boxing without his father's permission. Rules, however, are sometimes made to be broken, so is anything that crosses Wong's path. Jackie Chan plays Wong in the wildly inventive and hilarious action comedy hailed as one of his all-time best. Determined to stop the smugglers of priceless national artifacts, Wong confronts his foes with drunken boxing, a loose-limbed fighting style in which he staggers, leans, weaves, and clowns like a sailor on shore leave. The style's name belies the intricate nature of its choreography. The show-stopping final smackdown alone, with bravura touches that include Wong turning himself into a human blowtorch, took 4 sober-minded months to shoot. It's 200 proof excitement. And this includes the original English subtitles seen on the Hong Kong theatrical release and the original English language Golden Harvest theatrical trailer, as well as, I want to say there's an English dub, there's Cantonese, and Mandarin. So you have 3 language options for watching this film. And it is quite the spectacle indeed, as you would expect from Jackie Chan, and was one that I was not familiar with. I mean, I'd heard the title, but I'd never seen it until this Blu-ray, and the Blu-ray looks good. So if you are a fan of Jackie Chan, this is definitely one you'll be wanting to pick up ASAP for sure. And they are not wrong about that climax. I'm not going to say anything about it, but wow. Really impressive stuff. Jackie Chan is just one of those icons that, to me, his physicality is almost unrivaled. I mean, you know, he obviously took inspiration from somebody like Buster Keaton, but he sort of builds on it in his own way with his martial arts choreography and his abilities as a performer physically, meaning doing his own stunts and everything. Just incredible to watch. Breathtaking, absolutely. So I love when Warner Archive does these more modern releases, as well as I think it introduces the brand to some folks that veer away from the classic film titles, but definitely check out these classic films as well. So this is a nice group of titles for the month of May. Crossfire might actually have been an April title now that I think about it, but I neglected to mention it last month and I wanted to bring it in. So definitely check out some of these Warner Archive titles. I think we know Warner Archive is on its last legs. Maybe we are about a year away from the end of the line based on what I've heard. But there is a lot of exciting stuff still coming, so I would say don't back away from supporting them, because who knows what can happen in a year. But anyway, that's it for this Warner Archive update, and I will talk to you guys very soon. Bye-bye.